parade.
You'll recognize Mom. She looks the same.
Could I have your attention,
We
please?
have. I keep saying every year we're going to go out and see Washburn.
Must
but
be
we
time.
Go down to Florida. We're going to
Hi.
Stairs are over there.
Hi.
Could I have your attention, please? If we could all take our seats. Someone told me if I didn't call the group to order, the kibitzing would go on all evening, and we wouldn't even have time for the program. So
That's okay.
Supposed to be up.
thank you for finding your seats.
Okay.
That was the instructions.
This is you, Bob.
DB. Oh no, oh no. You gotta be careful.
How's Brenda doing?
Like I know your faces, but I can't wait for the name. What's the faces anymore?
In case
Who's that gentleman right on the aisle?
they and you may bump into each other. Emily's now 20.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening. I'm Gary Johnson, president of the Chicago History Museum, and I'd like to welcome you all to the Chicago History Museum. I'd like to also recognize fellow museum director who's with us, Alan Lowe, from the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum in Springfield. Alan? So I want to put something on the table right away, so there's no doubt about it. We are celebrating Governor Thompson, but I think we're also celebrating the governor who in his era set the standard, not only in Illinois, but nationally, for effective leadership by a governor. And it's an honor to have you here.
That's good.
Everyone in the room has their memories, their thoughts, their reflections, and we're going to hear some from a panel today. I have to share mine. I don't know if you remember, Governor, but I was part of the group that would always show up on your doorstep every year with Dawn Clark Netsch as we petitioned for another approach to judicial selection. I was even on a commission that you appointed on that subject. And when you think about all the people you've named commissions in 14 years, I mean, I think we'd fill the auditorium several times over. And, you know, we never got the proposal we wanted, but we always went away feeling that we had been received fairly, got a helpful hand. Those were the days when there was a degree of bipartisan cooperation. And those are the days that I think we need to look back to. The fact is that we're in a kind of World War I trench warfare now, where we're each in our trenches and we're lobbing grenades at unseen enemies. And I think we ought to go back and learn something from the generals of the other wars about how to accomplish things, accomplish goals, even during difficult periods. But today, we also are welcoming a great friend of history. Something you might not know about Governor Thompson was among his many other civic activities. He was a board member of the Chicago Historical Society. So on behalf of the now Chicago History Museum, we thank you for your service to history. So today we will have a panel. The fact is, when I think about all of them, it's truly a dream team. And, you know, you think about, say, that television series, The West Wing, the people who sort of made it all possible. Well, this is the real thing. And aside from what they did during those 14 years, this dream team went on and accomplished many things in the years that followed. You may hear a little more about that afterwards. So, the leader of the discussion this evening is a historian and a retired military officer. He's the director of oral history at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. Please welcome Mark Depew.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here. I can't really see you too well. The lights are in my eyes, but it's a thrill to have you here. But Governor, let me start off by saying this. It's been one of the great honors of my life to have the chance to sit down with you and learn so much about your administration and about those critical years in Illinois history. And it's not just talking to you, but so many others in your universe of Illinois politics at the time. It's just it's a wonderful opportunity that I had, and I really deeply appreciate that, and thank you for giving us the opportunity. I'm going to be brief because you don't want to hear from me too much, you want to hear from our panel members, but I had to talk a little bit about the scope of our project that we had. We started in January 2013, Governor, you remember? Your first painful memory about this, I suspect. And the goal was obviously to conduct a thorough, in-depth examination of your life and especially your administration, which meant that we didn't want to just talk to you, but political opponents, people in the legislature, obviously so many of the critical aides that you had, and I've already mentioned that. We wanted a balanced view, and I think we absolutely got that balanced view. We wanted to have the interviews professionally transcribed and edited, and I want to point out here, if I can, Dr. Mike Saplicki, where are you? If you could stand up and give a wave. Several of you in here were interviewed by Mike, and you're all going to eventually be edited by Mike, and he does a superb job of really giving more depth to the whole project. The transcriptions were primarily done by the Audio Transcription Center in Boston, Massachusetts, and a handful have been done by some of my volunteers who work in Springfield. And the first interview, July 17, 2013. That's 4 years ago almost. Okay, the project by numbers. 24 new interviews in the collection. When I say interviews, those are individuals. And some people might wonder about this, but I am proud to say we got over 62 hours with Governor Thompson himself. So you can examine every nuance of that long life, and it's been a fascinating experience, as I said before. 23 more interviews, and that's a total of 246 more hours. Now you think, that's all about Governor Thompson? No, but it's almost all about Illinois politics. So this collection and the others that we have, I think, are a great way to really examine in depth what's going on in Illinois politics, really everything from the 1950s beyond. We went through and counted on the webpage, and we posted these as well, so they had links. 20 more interviews that were already in our collection that had a lot of material about Governor Thompson. We had one of our volunteers who did a big project on the Education Act of 1985, a former school superintendent, and that's another 29 interviews. And then there was another one on school reorganization, which, as most of you know, is always a hot topic in Illinois, and that's another 7 interviews. So, what we posted on the website right now is the entire interviews. Everything is there except for some of the transcripts. Most of the transcripts we're still working on because we insist that they're edited and reviewed by the interviewees. There is a narrative history of your life, Governor, that I've already written, and now that I've got a couple interns, we can get that posted to the website. And what I think is so interesting and important about that narrative history, it weaves in lots of audio clips of yourself and others, photos, cartoons. There's even a couple graphs and charts for the numbers folks out there. The Thompson years told through political cartoons, and all I need to do there is get permission from some newspapers to be able to post that material. And then I have a one of my new interns is working on a teacher lesson plan. And our goal there is to compare your campaign style with campaign styles of a couple of your opponents, Michael Pecalis and Adlai Stevenson, and get the kids to talk about it and what's appropriate and what works and what doesn't work, and see what we can do to get some classroom debate. So it wasn't just the interviews that we wanted to do. This was a very important special project, and that's what we've done. Now, I've talked too much already. What I want to do is to have other people tell about your life and what they mean to you. So we start with Dave Gilbert.
He was an easy guy to work with as far as the press secretary, because he loved to do interviews. He loved to give and take the sparring with journalists and so forth. And he made his bread and butter in the courtroom, handling tough conversations, you might say, and giving impressions to juries and to judges. That's how his mind worked. And he was just extremely good with that. Not only with the media, but with opposition groups. We were in Southern Illinois one time, and he's going someplace. I happened to go past a coal mine, where the miners were on strike, and there was a group of miners out, picketing and so forth. And somebody said, the county chairman says, you don't want to talk to those people. They're really upset about this. And Thompson said, stop the car. And he hops out and he talks with them. And, pretty soon they're all best friends. And, okay, guys, I'll see you next time. Back in the car, and off he goes. But that's the way Thompson worked, and that was part of the key to his, not only his success, but his popularity.
So that's Dave Gilbert, the press secretary for the first 3 elections. Mike McCormick, he wasn't part of this project. I interviewed him for an earlier project, but he was a young Johnson County Republican Party chairman and remembers the day you came down to Johnson County, Governor.
Jim Thompson, I must tell you, my experience with him, one of the best politicians I've ever seen. He'd come down to Southern Illinois, and he could talk better drawl in Southern Illinois than I could, and I grew up there. The first time I met Jim Thompson, he came to Vienna, Illinois. We blocked off a part of the square in Vienna. We had the Vienna Great School Band there. Jim Thompson comes in a big Winnebago thing, comes out, he's this big, tall guy, and he has a flannel shirt on and a pair of corduroy pants on. And here I am, suit and tie on, and my dad's got a suit and tie on because the governor candidate's coming to town. And he gets up to make a speech, and he's y'alling it, and how y'all doing, and it's good to be down here in Southern Illinois. And he said Vienna instead of Vienna, and he'd kiss a baby, and eat a hot dog, and pat you on the back. And we would have those big gospel singers. I think I mentioned before. Jim Thompson would come in. He would grab a kid in one arm, a hot dog in the other arm, walk down in front of 1,000 people. In the middle of a big gospel sing, he'd get up and start clapping, and every Pentecostal person in that crowd thought that the Holy Ghost had risen on him. And quite frankly, he was having a good time. I don't think it was the Holy Ghost, but I think he was having a good time. And if he wasn't, the only person in that room that knew he wasn't having a good time was Jim Thompson.
So there's from the trenches an impression. Next one is Greg Bays. He had a variety of jobs in the governor's office. Started as a travel aide. What do you call your travel aides, Governor? Bag boys. Scheduler, personnel director, which is not an easy job, and then director of IDOT. Here is his impression.
Leadership, he set a tone about the fact that, we're going to do what's right, we're going to do it above board, we're going to do it honest, and so there was an ethical standard that was there. So that kind of leadership, I think, is when people would say during the George Ryan fiasco, well, it's always been done like that. No, it hasn't been done like that. And Thompson made it very clear that was the kind of standard. From a management style, Thompson delegated and let you were given a job to do, so go do it. I'm not going to micromanage it. You don't have to worry about second guessing in that regard. I think that was the notion that he gave his cabinet officials, and it was the notion they gave his staff people, you're responsible, do it. And not going to, not going to see if you're here at 8:30 in the morning or if you're here, leaving before 5. It wasn't that kind. More of a laissez-faire, hands-off from that standpoint. Thompson allowed for a pretty free-flowing, open discussion of various things. He would have meetings over at the mansion in the afternoon, sit around, discuss things, let everybody talk, and come to a conclusion. Once it came to a conclusion, that was it.
And next, Kirk Dillard, legislative liaison from 81 to 83, and then director of legislative affairs towards the middle of the administration.
Your first impressions of Jim Thompson, bigger than life, unbelievably brilliant man, and somebody who I thought was a great governor and a very good orator. And he was literally and figuratively a giant. When Jim Thompson walked into a room, there was an aura there. That he was brilliant, that he was witty, he had a sense of humor, and he had an ability to get along with anybody. And I remember a time when, he met my grandmother at the state fair. And he said, "Hey, Granny, how are you? Can the governor have a kiss?" And he could go from that and then go back to the office and be in the most serious review of a prisoner's clemency petition, or go to sit down with Wall Street bankers.
And Tim Romani, one of your very successful bag boys, and you had lots of them, and I know you're very proud of them, 1984 to 85.
Bigger than life. He was, his ability to relate with people of all kinds, and he was an incredibly well-educated person, and very skilled in terms of his legal skills and his overall utilization of his intellect. He certainly was the vice person that, at that point in my life that I ever met, just incredibly intelligent. But his gift to me was his ability to relate to anybody and everybody. He was just gifted at his personal interaction skills with anybody and everybody, no matter who they are, what they did, what their passions were. He had the ability to just connect and relate to people. He was also he's an incredible listener. He would, when he was in a staff meeting or when he was meeting with constituents, he was always the one who let everybody finish their sentence or their paragraph before he even attempted to react to it. So his listening skills, his ability to comprehend and digest information and know what to do with it, just remarkable. Just a truly remarkable person.
And the last one I've got here, Governor, I think is probably one of your favorite campaign aides, and that's Samantha.
I think he's quieter at home. I mean, everybody is, right? You don't have to put on a show for your family. And I think he's actually kind of a shy person by nature. I think he learned how to be more outgoing because he had to be. But he's happy-go-lucky, and he doesn't bear anybody ill will, and he's really like that. He's got a thick skin. It's not even so much a thick skin, it's just like a willing to be oblivious, not, willing to not concentrate on things that are upsetting.
Did you pick up that trait?
No. We remember who said what, when they said how it made us feel, and we're not going to forget that person until we get the apology, which of course we never get. So, but that's why he's the politician.
And I can't leave the podium here without a plug for our oral history program, and especially the Governor Jim Thompson Project page. You type in www.oralhistory.illinois.gov. That takes you to our main page. You find Illinois Statecraft. You click on that, and then you obviously find Governor Thompson's collection, and then you can see all of these interviews that we've been talking about. So Now it's time to get to the important part of the evening. If I can have my 4 panel members come up, and I will join them up front here in a second. Hopefully these lav mics are working. I'm going to start with a very, very brief introduction because they can explain themselves what they did for the governor. And I asked each one of them to tell briefly what their duties were with Governor Thompson and then tell their quintessential Thompson stories and do all of that in 5 or 10 minutes. So we've got Dave Gilbert on the left, as I mentioned, the campaign manager, the press aide for the first 3 elections, the closest election in Illinois history, the biggest victory in Illinois history. Jim Fletcher, who was a campaign manager for a couple times and also the deputy governor early in the administration. Then we've got their Bob Mandeville, who got to balance 14 budgets, something like that.
Right.
And Paula Wolf, who was policy and planning director for all of those years, all 14 years. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dave.
Thank you very much, Bruce. You know, so many stories in so little time. This is not fair. Trying to sort out the ones that you wanted to talk about, trying to sort out the ones that you couldn't talk about was even a harder job. My friend Greg Bays says, "Remember, Gilbert, what went on in Vegas stays in Vegas." First, I would like to know how many people in this room tonight were involved in Big Jim's first campaign in 1975 and 76. If you would stand up if you can.
Oh, everything.
All right. Now, by raising your hand, how many people in the room worked in the administration somewhere along the line from 1977 up till 1991? Oh, that's wonderful. Now I can tell who's here. It's everybody who had something to do with Jim Thompson's administration. I'll start from the beginning. I was a reporter for the Chicago Tribune in 1975, sitting at my desk one day, and the phone rang. And the voice said, "My name is Jim Thompson. You know, are you Dave Gilbert?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You probably heard I'm running for governor. Would you have any interest in talking to me about being press secretary?" And I said, "Governor, if there's one," I said, "Jim," he wasn't governor yet. I said, "Jim, if there's one thing I've learned about covering politics for the Chicago Tribune, that is never get involved in politics." And he said, "Well, I'm really looking for somebody, can we talk?" And I said, "Sure." I had never covered him as a reporter, had never met him, so I was looking forward to meeting this guy who had indicted and convicted over 380 some politicians, half of them Democrats, half of them Republicans. And I thought, holy cow, this must be, this is going to be an interesting discussion. So we met for a couple of hours and we talked and went over everything, what his views were, what he thought he could accomplish by running for governor and so forth. And he piqued my interest. At the end of the conversation, he said, "Well, what do you think? Are you interested?" And I said, "You know, I might be." And he said, "Well, let's take 2 weeks." He says, "I'll check you out and you check me out." I said, "That's fair enough. That's what we'll do." A couple weeks later, I get another phone call and he said, "Gilbert, I've checked you out despite what I've heard. I'd like you to be my president." And I said, "Well, Jim, you know, I've checked you out despite what I've heard. I'll take the job." All my friends at the Tribune were saying, "Gilbert, that's the craziest thing you could ever do. You know, Dan Walker, Walkin' Dan Walker, is one of the most populous governors the state has ever had. There's no way a rookie politician who doesn't have any political experience can stand a chance." Well, we went in and quickly put a campaign together. We started with nothing, no desks, no pencils, no pens, no nothing. And one of the first things that Jim did was hire a guy by the name of Jim Fletcher. And Fletch, my good friend, came in, and he gave us the political expertise that was sadly lacking at this point in our campaign. None of us really had any political experience, but Fletch had been around the track a few times and knew who to call and what to say and who we should be knocking on doors for money and all of this. So he brought some real structure to our campaign. We hired a group from Washington, Bailey Deerdorf, Doug Bailey and John Deerdorf, who came in and immediately started putting together campaign commercials. The numbers were that he was fairly well recognized in the 6-county metropolitan area, but downstate, hardly any name recognition at all. So we started with Campaigning 101, and being 6'6", he would go into a room and naturally gravitate to the corner because he's so tall, taller than anyone else in the room. We said, Jim, you got to stand in the middle of the room, you got to put your hand out, say, my name is Jim Thompson, I'm running for governor of Illinois. And he began to repeat that mantra time and time and time, and probably millions of times, I would say, Governor, over the course of the campaign. But he also began to be a very good campaigner. He used to have breakfast once a week or so at the Union League Club with 2 men from Chicago, Mike Howlett and Marshall Korshak. And Howlett would impress on him, you know, if you're going to get into this political game, you got to slap people on the back. You got to hug the ladies. You got to kiss the babies. You got to drink a beer on the front porch. You got to do this. You got to do that. Little did they know, giving that advice, that, you know, a few months later, Thompson's going to be running against Howlett. And as luck would have it, there was a big comparison. That first campaign, we put together a campaign structure, a field organization, unlike any that's ever been put together by a rookie politician. We had advanced people. We had people who knew the county chairman and so forth. A lot of the Republican county chairmen at this time were dragging their feet. They didn't know about this guy Thompson, whether he was really Republican, and B, whether there would be any Republican jobs for their people once he got to Springfield. So that question was answered as the campaign grew. In June of 1976, I think it was June 19th, 1976. It was a very important day in the life of Governor Thompson and Miss Jane Carr, who that day became his wife. And the wedding was held at the St. James Episcopal Cathedral in Chicago. And the grousers, the opponents, were saying, oh, this is just a political move. Believe me, folks, this was not this was no politics. Well, I must say that if you've been to St. James, there's a big choir loft up in the front on the right side. That was reserved for Republican county chairman. But other than that, it was a beautiful wedding and a day that was very fondly regarded by all of us. We went on through the campaign in 1976, and things were going fairly well, except we're running out of money, and things are not looking good. We go into Labor Day of 1976 with the election being a month and a half away, and Jim is saying, you know what, we're out of money. I think we're going to have to start laying some people off or doing something. Just at that moment, the Chicago Tribune came out with a poll that showed he had a nice lead over Mike Howlett. And as happens in Illinois politics, the floodgates opened, the money started coming in, everybody kept their jobs, and we rolled on. McCormick, County Chairman McCormick mentioned the gospel sings in southern Illinois. We were going down the eastern side of Illinois from Charleston all the way down to the Ohio River. The last week of the campaign in November of 1976, and C.L. McCormick, who was a representative from that area, had been just badgering Jim Thompson to come to his gospel sing. And so we're riding along in an RV. We had TV crews from Chicago. We had Dick Kay from WMAQ, Larry Green from the Daily News. There may have been a couple of national correspondents with us. And Jim said to the group, well, what am I going to say at this gospel sing? And somebody said, well, why don't you just compare your opponent to Moses? So a few hours later in the gospel sing, he's up there with y'all and drawl and hallelujah and everything else going on. He said, and my opponent, Mike Howlett, is just like Moses. He's been to the mountaintop. He's seen the promised land, but he will never get there. And the place was up for grabs. It was, of course, that made all the stories that were played back in Chicago. A few days later, we're down in Elizabethtown on the banks of the Ohio River. And it's a week before the election. And in the middle of the Ohio River off to the east, there's an island. This is such a perfect setting. It's 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's autumn. The leaves are on the ground. The high school band is playing. The sun is setting. And the county chairman from Hardin County, the Republican chairman from Hardin County, stands up. And he said, my friends, this time next week when the sun comes up over Hurricane Island, we're going to have a new governor, and his name is Jim Thompson. And all the 500 people were shouting and clapping, and the little band is playing away. And I'm stepping back under this oak tree, and I'm thinking, you know what? He just may pull this thing off. If we're in Elizabethtown, Illinois, on the banks of the Ohio River, where people are closer to Mississippi than they are Chicago in more ways than one, we've got a chance. And that chance came a week later when he beat Mike Howlett by the largest plurality of any governor elected. Went on to defeat Mike McAllis 2 years later by the largest margin any governor had been reelected by in the history of the state. And 4 years later, went on to beat Trounce, Adlai Stevenson, by 5,074 votes, which was the smallest number any governor had been reelected by. So after setting 3 records, the largest, the smallest, I figured it's probably time for me to get a real life and head out of Springfield. So that's when I left in 1985 and went into the corporate world. But I'll say just a couple of things about the first campaign, which I've dwelt on. A, it showed that a person with principles, who's bright, who's honest, who has the ability to bring good people in, can get the job done in this state, and he certainly did. There was Build Illinois. There were all these other programs that I'm sure my friends are gonna talk about. But when Big Jim turned the lights out in the governor's office for the last time in 1991, they broke the mold. They don't make them like that anymore. And those were the days, my friends. Those were the days. Thank you.
Jim.
Well, it was kind of remarkable that as Governor Thompson and you were talking in the summer of '75, I also got a call from Jim Thompson, and I'd been around at 33, I still had been around a little bit because in Illinois in 1973, 74, 75, there just wasn't anybody around. And so I got a call from the governor, Jim Thompson, and I thought, this is terrific. He's going to hire me to be his outside counsel to create his campaign. And I thought, that's not bad. And so I met with the governor and Dan Weil at the Union League Club, and we had lunch. And essentially, he said, I've looked at other people who've run for office. I've interviewed their campaign chairmen or campaign managers, and I began to think at that point, we're not trending in quite the way I thought we were doing in this conversation. And by the way, just so you know this, I didn't know anything about running a campaign. I mean, I knew a lot about the laws about campaigns, and I knew a lot about
Now you
a
tell
bunch of
us.
stuff. But so he said, I've interviewed so-and-so with Dirksen's campaign and so from Ogilvy's. And he said, but after talking with a lot of people, I think that would you consider running my campaign? And I didn't know what to say initially. And my real reason was this. I would love to run his campaign, but it would really be kind of a novice undertaking for both of us. But I thought about it just a nanosecond, and I said, of course, I'd love to do it. You gotta give me a little bit of time to unravel my practice, what little there was of it at that time. I said, but I would love to run your campaign. And it was the first time we met, and after that, I began to work with the governor and Dave Gilbert over, and I wanna say it was like 200 South Dearborn Street, one floor up, overlooking a low, somewhat needy parking lot. And it had great carpeting that hadn't been washed in 50 to 80 years. And it reminded you that you really were going to do something that really meant something. I mean, you only really go through all this as a passion at that stage. And he just was, as everyone has said, bigger than life, smartest man in every room, nicest man in every room, and it was genuinely true. I mean, also the thickest skin in every room. You know, he would take so many beatings, and I would always be amazed at his equanimity. So we began the campaign. Doug Bailey, who I'm told studied under and got his doctorate under Henry Kissinger at Harvard. I mean, Doug Bailey was one sharp cookie, as was Bob Teeter and John Deerdorf, who made up the polling and the media aspects to our campaign. And the team kind of coalesced. We could never raise any money at all because everybody was looking at the Howlett Walker race, and we were kind of an afterthought at best. And thank heavens, we were running against a man who knew how to watch his weight, but not how to watch winning an election. Our opponent was Dick Cooper, who either was the founder of Weight Watchers or the major investor. And he was our opponent in the primary. So it gave us a little more flexibility than we might have otherwise had. During the campaign, Dave and the governor are out on the stump constantly and continuously. I'm running around doing whatever I'm supposed to be doing or I'm being told to do by Governor and Dave and Teeter and Bailey. And I'm just going to pause here for a minute and get to what my job was when we finally won. But one of the things that, and you saw it on the screen, one of the things that uniformly is said about Governor Thompson is, what an amazing campaigner. You know, and there were all these, and they're not myths. None of them are myths. And I've been doing really people-oriented things in a thoughtful, caring way, and sipping beer from various kinds of objects and things. But one thing I wanted to mention tonight is, Jim Thompson was also the smartest campaign strategist we knew and we had on board. Bailey, and this is just true, in the campaign as well as in the early, Jim Thompson made all the decisions. Right. I mean, nobody stood around hypnotizing him and saying, now march forward and do this. and it was true of advertising. And one of the things that I thought was his hallmark that is really important for people to realize is this. The great secret of the Thompson campaign was in 76, or 75, 76, was no one south of the Chicago media market knew who Big Jim Thompson was. Just like no one from Chicago knew who the U.S. attorney in Springfield was. Up here, where Jim Thompson did his job, and by the way, the quotes about Thompson are the greatest ones in the world. They're all true, and they just say it all. We had a saying in the U.S. Attorney's Office, never be afraid to do what's right. Well, it was true, and that's what happened up here. And as a result, his ability to control the votes and to be able to have a huge name ID and a huge voter approval was absolute, which was one of the other reasons why he spent a lot of time downstate, which was because we were flat broke all the time because no one cared about us. We had no way to deliver a message downstate other than by physical appearances. So the whole question was, and this is where he's also the smartest campaign strategist around, and was this: how do you, when you have no money and you have no ability to get any, and you're not going to message downstate because it takes too much at that time, how do you ever get yourself known down there? Because once either Howlett or Walker won, the reality was whoever won was absolutely known everywhere. You know, they had absolute name ID because of either, both, former governor, former secretary of state. And so one day, about a month before the primary, I'm kind of, and by the way, I did not make media decisions, okay? I enjoyed watching the commercials, and I'd at times offer sage advice. But the reality was this was not my forte. And I was advised of the following, and it was really what the governor had decided while working with Jim Thompson, with Doug Bailey. Why don't we, and by the way, in some political circles, if you were to say this, they would put you immediately in a straitjacket and take you out of the room. Why don't we do a 4.5-minute commercial, film it now, about the life of Jim Thompson? Then, why don't we, on election night, have Jim Thompson, in addition to declaring victory against Cooper, why don't we have him read a script, and we'll have it filmed with Doug Bailey's film crews. We'll have it filmed, and that will become the opening message to our 4.5-minute commercial, which by the way, no one does 4.5-minute commercials. And the reason they don't is because they're boring and people don't care. And it was as true then as it is now. And then, in addition to having this 4.5-minute commercial, why don't we run it the day after the primary everywhere downstate for 3 solid weeks, okay? And so you know, I said, of course, I think that's a great idea. And no one in the Western world would view that as a great idea except Jim Thompson and Bailey. And what they decided was, going on the air immediately after the primary, the voter still had an attention span, and the downstate voter, you could capture that, if you will, residual focus. And we scrounged up the money. I don't know how we did it. A guy that would play lots of nice roles in our life in placing TV, Bill Peltier. I'm sure Bill Peltier was out there, and he'd always talk like this: "Hi, guy, how's it going, guy?" And we'd say, "Hi, Bill." And so anyway, Bill placed all the advertising. We had it purchased, the governor on election night, and I thought, this is so crazy. There's film crews everywhere, you know, when usually it's just a crowd in front of you and you wave at them for a while. And we had film crews and everything else, had the money, had it placed, and the next morning they went out and they ran the ad for 3 weeks downstate. When it was over, the governor's name ID had gone from 30% to about 75 or 80% downstate, and the approvals were just as high. It was remarkable, and it achieved everything that Governor Thompson and Doug Bailey thought it would. They were willing to take the chance, and within 3 weeks after the primary election, it was a dead heat downstate with this guy that no one had heard of 3 weeks before. And it's one of the things that is worth just kind of mentioning as a footnote. Jim Thompson was a great campaigner, but Jim Thompson was a brilliant campaign strategist as well. And you see it, and I'm big for Jim. You don't have to be 6'6" to stand tall for Illinois. You know, just great, great slogans. So in any event, we go through the election. Dave's kind of covered it. And we win by this gigantic margin. At that point, the governor looked at me, and it was on election night, and he said, Jim, and I took it as a compliment. He said, you may not have known much about running a campaign, but you do know about state government. And he said, I would like you now to come and join me and be my deputy governor down in Springfield. And I instantly said yes, because this would be, it wouldn't be great fun, by the way, which is something I want to mention at this point. So he won. But the problem was this was a unique period in Illinois time. First of all, he only ran, the term of office that he won was 2 years. The Constitution changed to non-presidential. So when the governor won in 76, when he got sworn in January of 77, in 11 months after that, he was filing his petitions again, number one. Number two, Dan Walker had left the state. I'm going to defer to Dr. Bob eventually on this, but he left the state with either a $78 or an $87 million deficit.
50.
$50 million, even better. And so we're in debt. We're living in a world of confrontation politics. Walker took on the real Mayor Daley endlessly. He took on the General Assembly endlessly. And the General Assembly was Democratic. So the setting going into that, into the Governor Thompson's term of office, is really this. Your budget is unbalanced. You're not going to raise taxes. You have a legislature that has been confronted endlessly, and it's Democratic. Mayor Daley has just died on December 20th, so there's this gigantic confused power vacuum going on. And the reality for us was this. The most important time in a candidate's running for re-election is the year in which he files, not the year in which he runs. Because the stronger you look in the year in which you file determines how many people think they can beat you. And so the stronger the governor would look from basically January through June would determine to some real degree what kind of competition he would face by filing in the next year. So we essentially, and the governor had 6 months to make this all work. And luckily, none of us really had enough experience to see all that in advance. And so we were all just happy to be serving on the ship of state that, who knew where it was really heading? The governor took basically about a 5-point set of goals for that really first 2 years, but certainly the first year. Number one, balance the budget, no new taxes. Second, tough on crime, statutory increases in sentencing. 3, squeaky clean ethics. And 4th, efficiencies in government such as rooting out welfare fraud, and also Gaylord Freeman and Warren King's cost control task force, which honestly went in with the best executives over a year's period of time, came into state government and took a look at it from a management point of view and came back, I think, the year later with a recommendation of at least $300 million in savings. Big money at that time, but those were his goals. And the problem was you had to get them through a General Assembly who had been beaten up and who was still Democratic and might well want to try to retake the State House 2 years from now. So that was the challenge. One of the things that you've seen on this screen endlessly is people saying how nice Governor Thompson is. I mean, it's uniform. He's thoughtful, he's attentive, he pays attention, he's gregarious, he likes people, he doesn't have a thick skin, he listens to you. And in some amazing way, Cecil Partee, Phil Rock, Tommy Hines, and Terry Bruce and Mayor Daley come together to allow Jim Thompson's finest personal attributes come to the fore and make inroads into the trust that the General Assembly found for 14 years thereafter, and helped us immensely in those 6 months. And it was this: Mayor Daley has died. Cecil Partee announced he was going to retire, and he was the president of the Senate. It sets off this fight to succeed Partee by Terry Bruce, downstate senator, Phil Rock, and Tom Hines. Under the Illinois Constitution, Governor Thompson, or the sitting governor, has to preside over the Senate as they deliberate on who should lead them. No other business can get done in the Senate, but all the senators hang around and talk to each other and look at the ceiling. And Governor Thompson goes and of course presides, and he sits there doing his day job, which happened to be trying to govern the state of Illinois, while really sitting there with all of these senators who were trying to figure out who they should elect to succeed them. That would be okay, but what really happened was the battle lasted for 6 weeks and 187 separate ballots. And this gave the Senate, and especially the Senate Democrats, a chance to get to know Jim Thompson, and he to get to know them. And they didn't know each other before then. And what happened out of it all was, and it's really true, and you could just watch it gradually occur and then firmly become entrenched, especially with someone like your friend Phil Rock during all the 80s. The Senate Democrats decided Thompson's okay. This is a guy we can do business with. This isn't a guy that's beating us over the head. This is a guy that you can trust. And so when the battle for the presidency was over, Tom Hines won the election. Jim Thompson came back to our offices. It was with at least one chamber very, very much committed to giving him a chance. And when you think about, we only had 6 months to accomplish anything before our opponents decided, started measuring Jim Thompson for whether he could be defeated. We ended up early enough in that session having a great rapport with the Senate Democrats and eventually a rapport with the House Democrats too that was just marvelous. And it was one of those things that simply happens. So the governor became, the 14 years of him being known as one of the most remarkable compromisers, one of the most remarkable people who could work with the General Assembly, found its beginnings in Cecil Partee's decision not to run again so in any event, having said all that, the election came. My job, by the way, while we were there my job was to do whatever Governor Thompson wanted me to do. That was essentially my job. And it took several different kind of components. One was special projects. And when you did a special project for the governor, it consisted of, number one, making sure that's something he wanted to do. Number two, going back to him periodically to let him know what you're doing to make sure that you haven't gone off to the wrong road. And then to basically try to reach a conclusion that he wished. Some of the tasks that I devoted time to during that first 6 months were, number one, dutifully listening to Dr. Bob as often as he would let me on learning about the Illinois budget. Because Dr. Mandeville said to me once, my big fear, Fletcher, is that you're going to be in a room someday and someone's going to say something and you're going to say yes and not realize it's going to cost me money. And so I thought, well, I better go find that out. The other, pardon me?
I think that happened.
Yeah.
Jim, is that your
Oh,
segue to Bob here?
not yet. Just one more second. Just one more second. You can tell, you guys can tell I didn't enjoy my job. So, but the other two were the crosstown agreement.
Yeah, I know.
We did, and the ASME collective bargaining agreement was something else that we did. My other job was to work with the legislature and Zale Glaberman and the governor all the time, especially in passing the bills necessary to balance the budget. After the session was over, by the way, and I'm almost done, it dawned on me as we went through this whole session, the reality is legislators are expecting, we went through the session, right? And so my job, I thought, was to make sure that all of the commitments that we made through the session actually got concluded. Welching was not going to be one of Governor Thompson's, even a suggestion about him. And finally, during that first campaign, or first 2 years, I worked with Bailey and Teeter and our campaign to develop alternative ways of having a campaign during his. Now, the final thing is this, and I gotta say this because, and then I really am done. So the whole point of everything is the measure of Governor Thompson is more than remarkable. And his measure was taken in April of '76 when we're running, our opponent's Bacalus. And Teeter does a poll, and one section of the poll addresses pro-choice versus pro-life. And one of my jobs is to go in and to walk the polling data through with Governor Thompson. And we get to this, and at that point, by the way, as strange as it seems, we did not know what Governor Thompson's position on that issue, pro-choice, pro-life, was. It never came up in the Howlett campaign, and there it was. So I pointed out the Teeter data basically said that there is a good, strong core of pro-life voters throughout the state, and especially in the city of Chicago as well, and we're up against Bacalus. And the data suggested that if you are pro-life, under certain circumstances, that may be a plus. So as I'm starting to talk to the governor about this, and I'm 33 years old, okay? And he pauses and he just kind of lifts his hand up and he goes, Jim, he said, kind of like urging me, you don't have to go any further. He said, everything we do in government is important. He said, but this is remarkably important. And this is a crucial issue for the people of the state of Illinois. And he goes, I'll never forget it. He goes, Jim, I'm pro-choice. And if my being pro-choice means that I will lose the upcoming election, then that's fine with me. I was never prouder of anyone in my life. I had just been given a seminar or a tutorial on what being a public servant really means and should mean. And it means that you identify those few critical issues in your governorship which are so important that even if it costs you your job, you shouldn't change your position. And that is my most lasting memory of Jim Thompson, or the one that at least had the most phenomenal impact on me. He always got it right. And now I'm done.
Thank you very much, Jim. Now, Dr. Bob, you get to have the unenviable task of talking about a governor who had big projects in mind, who liked to build things, and you're dealing with the Great Recession on top of everything else.
Right. Can I have at least 2 minutes?
That leaves me 30 seconds.
Okay, you did put a time limit. Well, I'm Bob Mandeville. I was the budget director for Governor Thompson for the 14 years he was in office. Sometimes I was called by other names than budget director, some of which I can't mention in mixed company. The governor called me Dr. Bob. Howie Carroll called me Dr. No. And others called me the abominable no man. Now, think about it. The last two titles meant I was doing my job, saying no to spending. Governor Thompson, you were the one in charge during the 14 years the state remained solvent and kept their AAA rating. If you were still there, we would have a budget, it would be balanced, and we would still be a AAA state instead of one step away from junk bonds. "27 years ago, you gave me a going away party. Can't believe it was that long. And you thanked me for serving you. Tonight, I want to thank you. And Jane, you made a gracious First Lady for the state of Illinois." Governor, you ran the state, in my mind, like a board chairman, and you handpicked your staff, and they served you well. And the reason was we all had confidence in you, and we all felt that you were one that we could respect. We could recommend, but you made the hard decisions, and a couple of the easy ones, like the prairie chickens. Remember, Governor? Governor called me up one day and he said, "Dr. Bob, I just got a call from Gaylord somebody, I forgot his last name. Don. And he needs $50,000 for a prairie chicken refuge in Lake County. Do we have that much flexibility in the budget?" I said, "Yes, Governor, we do, but Illinois also has more than half of all the prairie chickens in the world. But we only have 1/4 of 1% of the people. The money should go for the people, not the prairie chickens." How many here think Gaylord got the $50,000? I remember the trips to the bond rating agencies, Governor. I remember how you told the agencies when we had a budget or a revenue shortfall, and that was the right thing to do. But you also told them how you were going to solve that problem, and that's what kept our AAA ratings. They didn't mind problems as long as we had a way to correct them. And when the governor said he was going to do something, he did it. So the next time he went to New York, they knew that they could believe him, that he would do what he said he would. I enjoyed the trips to New York, except the one where you took me to a district called Soho, and you were going to buy a ring for Jane. It was for Jane, wasn't it? Well, I got suspicious when I saw all his security people looking nervous and the 7 New York police cars kind of around the area. This door, you walked in the first door, and they locked the door behind you before you went into the second door. And then there were people inside the second door looking at you, strange people, before they would open the second door. Well, we finally got inside the store, and this man walked up to the counter. He knew the salesman had the ring. He knew exactly what it looked like, and he knew exactly what it was worth. My only concern was whether or not we would get out of the store alive. But we did. Each year, I would brief the press, the governor and I would brief the press on the budget. And before we went to the press room, the governor would call me up and say, "Let's talk about the things we want to focus on at the press conference." And so I'd give him maybe 10, 15 minutes of the key points of the budget. He would go down to the press room. He would say everything I told him in detail, and then he would embellish on it and add to it, and he was always right. I never figured out how you did that, Governor. But you guys remember that. But the one thing I really want to stress is I think you were very considerate of your staff. When we had a problem we would bring up, like Paula wanted a program we couldn't afford, no. You would have us all in the room, and we'd all have a chance to give our piece, what we wanted to say. You would ask questions, we would answer them, and then he would say, "Okay, I'll think it over, I'll get back to you." He never embarrassed any of his staff people because they weren't the ones who got the nod. And I thought that was really class, Governor. That I will remember forever. It's no surprise to me that you won election 4 times, and I believe you could have won it as many times as you wanted to run. And I want to thank you for the 14 years I got to spend in your administration. They were the best of my working career. Thank you, Governor.
And finally, we get to the key position, policy and planning, and you're the only one here, Paula, who is dressed appropriately in a Governor Thompson t-shirt, so congratulations for that.
Thank you. So first I want to thank Gary Johnson for hosting us here and Mark for putting this together, and I would echo Bob Mandeville's comments. I want to thank the governor for being such an extraordinary leader and having an opportunity to work with you and your family and many of the people here. It really is an exceptional point in my life, and I'm very grateful for it. So I decided I would actually follow the instructions, and can't help it, I'm a Girl Scout. I was the director of policy, and I have sort of 3 quintessential examples of the governor's personality, which was our assignment. So the first was very early on in the administration. My phone rings, and I am sitting there, and it's the receptionist. She says, the governor's on the phone. So I assume it's either Lita Moxted, his assistant in Chicago, or it's Gloria Evans, his assistant in Springfield. So I pick it up, and I'm, of course, doing something else because I've got ADD. And I said, yup. And there was just this minuscule pause, and he said, you mean, yup, Governor? And then the second example, which was absolutely terrifying, was I was, of course, obnoxious know-it-all. I had worked in the Ogilvy administration, so I thought I knew everything about state government. And at the beginning of the administration also, I wrote a memo about how I thought the governor should interact with the Illinois General Assembly. And it was this sophomoric, ridiculous memo about, you know, you can be the superstar, or you can lay back, or you can do some combination of both. And I made 3 copies. That was back in the days where we had carbon paper. 3 copies of the memo, and I gave 1 to the governor and 1 to 2 other people in the administration, both of whom are here today. And about 48 hours later, my phone rang, and I answered it, and this voice said, is this Paula Wolf? And I said, yes. And the voice said, may I read you something? And he read the first paragraph of this memo. He said, did you write that? And I said, yes. And he said, well, this is Mike Royko. And I said, oh my God. So shaking, I walked down to the governor's office, and I knocked on the door, and I said, Governor, I have to tell you I've done something awful. This was the stupidest thing I've ever done. I wrote this terrible memo, and Mike Royko just called me, and he has a copy of it, and, you know, I'll resign. I just feel awful. And he turned around in his chair at the desk, and he picked up the phone that was behind him on the credenza, and he called Mike Royko. He said, Mike, this is Jim Thompson. One of my silly staffers just wrote this memo, and I'm not going to pay any attention to it, but I just wanted you to know that I don't want you to do anything with it. And I thought, oh my goodness, what a wonderful human being, to Bob's point, that he always stood behind his staff. And I'm very grateful to whoever leaked that memo, because it taught me a lesson. Don't put it in writing, ever. Thank you. And then the third example, which was also very uplifting because I did policy, this was before one of the debates. The program staff worked like little mice in a wheel, and we wrote a whole series of memos to brief the governor on the debate. And we had everything from high sulfur coal to figuring out how to feed homeless children, and we gave him these enormous notebooks with big 3-ring notebooks with the biggest kind you can get, with the big things. So we're feeling very proud. I'm home that night. I turned on the news, and I looked in. There's somebody, probably Dave Gilbert or Dave Fields, got this guy to go interview the governor. He's sitting on the porch at the house with this notebook, and he's going through the notebook, and I think he had a little glass in his hand with some ice in it. And the guy says, well, Governor, how are you feeling about the debate tomorrow? And the governor said, I'm feeling great. And he said, are you prepared? The governor said, well, I'm supposed to read all this crapola, but I don't think I'm going to. I'm going to bed. So that kind of gave me some perspective. And then 3 of the important lessons I learned from him. The first one was similar to Bob's point, but I actually saw it a little differently. I worked for Governor Ogilvie. We'd give him a memo. It had 3 boxes to check. He'd check the box, he'd hand it back to you, and you'd go off and do it. First time I did that with Governor Thompson, I handed him a memo, and he read it, and he folded it up, and he put it in his pocket. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm a type A personality. We need to get on with this. We need to do it. And then I watched over the weeks, and he would take that policy problem and he would work it in his brain, and he would talk to people, and he'd figure out what was going on in the state. He'd go all over, he'd ask questions, ask a whole bunch of different people about whatever the topic was, and he would weave together a solution to that problem, which was not any one of the 3 boxes that we had on the memo. And that's when the program staff came up with the motto, solve no problem before it's time. So. Second thing I learned from him was we had a very esoteric, important policy debate about something. I have no idea what it was. We got all finished, and I said to the governor, this is great, Governor. I'm so excited. I think this is going to make a real difference. And he turned to me and he said, the only thing people really want from government is get their garbage picked up. And I was about to say, state government doesn't pick up garbage. And then I thought, oh, that's the message. And then the final one, and it's interesting that Jim and I had the same experience. You may not remember, but you dragged me to that meeting about choice. And I had no idea what I was doing there or what I was supposed to say or do. And I'm sitting in the corner thinking, you know what, I'm pro-choice. I don't know what Fletcher wants. And he pulls out his polling, and it was striking. And I remember the governor remarks on that. And coincidentally, Majority Leader Barbara Curry, about 2 weeks ago, sent me a copy of a veto message from 1977 on the first abortion bill. And I would read you the whole thing, but it's long, but I do want to read you the last 3 paragraphs. Regardless about what you think about abortion, this is a man who had courage, compassion, leadership, and a sense of the importance of what the governor's office should be and the impact that the institution should have on the state. So I'll read. I also understand that in vetoing this bill, I depart from the position expressed by the President of the United States, the Congress of the United States, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, and the General Assembly of the State of Illinois. I also believe that in so acting, I'm going against the sentiment of the people of Illinois, though I believe with all my heart that such a view would not be held by our citizens if they would thoughtfully consider what I've said in this message. Our people are not cruel people. In the end, a man can only act out of a sense of duty and conscience. The Constitution of Illinois confers that duty upon the governor, and my conscience has told me how to answer it, whatever the political cost. I hereby return House Bill 333, withholding my approval, and ask you to prayerfully and carefully consider the human consequences involved if you reaffirm your initial decision that this bill should be law. And he returned it to them, and they immediately overrode it in both houses.
Paula, back to me?
Back to you.
Well, actually, it's back to the audience. We want to give you an opportunity. I could sit here and ask questions all night long, but I've had my 4 years of doing that, so now it's your turn. Please direct your questions to one of the 4 panel members or the group, if you will. Who wants to start us off?
While everybody's thinking of a question, I have a comment. There are a couple people who aren't with us tonight who played just such a significant role in the Thompson administration. The first I'd like to mention is Art Quern. And Art was a favorite of all of us. He was a very special person who died in a tragic plane crash several years ago, but I wanted to mention Art and the significant part that he played in the Thompson administrations. And then I'd also like to mention Jim Skilbeck. And Skilby played a key role on the campaign trail and off the campaign trail. He came into my office in the first campaign in 1975, came out of radio. We didn't have money to hire him. But he said, well, you know, I'll volunteer. I've been involved in this and that. Skilby had the ability to, when Jim Thompson was downstate as an unknown, to take a clip out of a speech he was giving or a comment he's making. He would get to the phone, unscrew the receiver part, take his alligator clips and clip it in, call the radio stations in Chicago, say, I've got Jim Thompson who's been downstate and this is what he had to say today. That was our way of making news in Chicago when we were downstate. He also was the man who brought new meaning to leading a parade with a bullhorn. And he would have that bullhorn and he'd be sweating his T-shirt like Paula has on.
It actually is his, I believe. I just stole it from him.
And he would be leading the parade saying, ladies and gentlemen, the next governor of Illinois, Big Jim Thompson. And he would go from side to side, and the governor, and then the governor and Jane, and then the governor, Jane, and Samantha, and then the governor, Jane, Samantha, and two dogs. And the whole parade was going down the street. But Skilby had a touch of getting the governor out among the people and becoming a person that they wanted to meet and wanted to vote for and wanted to lead the state for 14 years. So here's the Skilby and here's the Art Coin.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have any questions or comments from the audience here? Yes.
Well, I have a comment more than a question, which I'm trying to formulate a question, but it isn't coming to me related to it. But anyway, first of all, I went to Episcopalian Church for the first time yesterday, and I enjoyed it. So there you go to the nod to that. I am deeply concerned. Over the course of my lifetime, I've seen this increasing viciousness on both sides. Even people whom I might even agree with. I won't go on Facebook anymore because it's become so incredibly toxic. And what I'm deeply afraid of is when I heard about going against the party and having the courage to say, you know, I believe in this party and I believe in 80% or 90% of what the party is saying. And I feel like we're, as citizens, we're called upon to do that, and particularly in this precarious state. I had a state of affairs because people are so gridlocked. I don't feel like people are really thinking things through, and I feel it's very dangerous when there's a blind devotion to a party, whichever party, just like when you have a blind devotion and you don't think things through to a religion, a party, a corporation, or anything. And I just want to say I appreciate actually the ability to really think through not what's popular or necessarily even what a party says, but how critical it is to know at the end of the day that you thought through and you did what was right, and even if you lose the game or you lose the job or you lose the title, you don't lose your soul over it. So that's my comment.
It's my job to repeat the comments or the questions, so I will be very brief, and I think the summation would be concern about how divisive politics is today, how entrenched people are to one particular side or the other, how difficult it is to reach across the boundaries and talk to each other and to think and deliberate with each other. And I think what you're really saying is, thank you, Governor Thompson, for figuring how to work through all of that. Would that be a fair way of summing it up?
Actually, I think to sum it up, not accurate, but I appreciate that. The accurate thing is the importance of thinking for yourself. Not that you don't talk to other people, but at the end of the day, you have a God-given brain, and it's your responsibility to use that and your conscience.
Okay, so think it through yourself and make that decision yourself after due deliberation and really critical thought.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know if anybody else?
Yeah, I just want to add something to that. I agree with that from a personal view, but you can't hold that to the extreme or nothing gets done.
Absolutely.
You have to compromise. You give some and you get some, and he was very good at that. I could tell you a story, I won't take the time now, but when they talked to Margaret Smith, a senator, on a welfare issue, he wanted her to give up on a welfare issue. Now this was a African American from the heart of Chicago, giving up on a welfare. She did. I've never heard, late at night in the office, he talked with her on the phone. She was crying, he was crying. You remember that, Governor? Yes. It was a masterful thing, but he compromised. And he gave something and she gave something. Republican, Democrat.
Okay, we have a question back here.
My name is Dave Gilbert, and I'm just one of a million arrows shot from the Thompson bow. But could you each maybe just talk for a second about how working with Governor Thompson and your time in his administration affected you and kind of helped you in your careers after working with the governor and the rest of your life?
Let me take a quick shot at that. Okay?
You're going to repeat the question?
Oh, no. Go ahead.
The question is to ask the panel members up here how the experience of working with Governor Thompson basically changed the trajectory of your own life. And Dr. Bob, we'll start with you.
I can answer that in one sentence. The governor told me one day that I had made him more fiscally conservative and he had made me more socially awareness.
I never noticed that.
We just didn't tell you program people.
How about the two that left the administration midstream? Dave.
Well, I told the governor before he was governor that one thing I had learned as a reporter was not to get involved in politics. And so after 10 years, I got out of politics and never went back. And a lot of people hang around and do the political thing, but I knew there would only be one administration like we had and led by an honorable man. Early on in our discussions, when we're kind of setting up shop in Springfield after the election, he said something to me that I never forgot, and that was, don't ever say anything or write anything down that you don't want to see on a headline in a newspaper someplace. And that was kind of the philosophy that we followed in the press office with Dave Fields, who followed after me. And he's the guy who won the lottery, not me. I used to get that question all the time. But it was very, very important. And I look at what is happening in our government today in Illinois, which is coming in last right across the board. It's a shame. And I look at what's happening in our nation with the distrust that people have of politicians. Politicians are way down. And I just thank God, I thank Jim Thompson that we had an opportunity to do it differently, and I think do it the right way. So thanks, Gov.
And Jim, you left and started a very successful lobbying career.
So I'm a lobbyist. and I went to Winston and Strawn after I left the governor. And I think that being with the governor, what really it told me was that you can be part of this political process and legislative process as long as you're a Boy Scout, as long as you're scrupulously honest, as long as you're ethical, and as long as you're substantive and the substance drives your arguments. That in the end, it sounds corny, but the way you, Mike McLean's here, the way you succeed in Springfield is through being nice with people, being straightforward with people, being ethical, keeping your word, and always understanding what the substance is. And I learned that all really under his tutelage for 3 or 4 years, and I hope and believe it's kept me in good stead.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, sir.
It's not a question, it's an observation. My name is Mort Kaplan, and you interviewed me in March. And I know Dave Gilbert from campaigns, and I had Democratic campaigns for Ab Mikva and for Alan Dixon. And what I want to say is I've had 2 Republicans that I've earned
And I think you wore that campaign button that we had that said, You wore the campaign button that we had that said, "I'm a Democrat, but ... which meant I'm voting for Big Jim.
I've got one in the back here.
I'm Lawrence Casal. I was early on in the, well, I was young in the administration. It was the highlight of my career.
Weren't we all?
Like it is for almost everyone here. My question is, who did you view as the competition for the state of Illinois while you were serving Governor Thompson? Was it other governors? Was it someone on the national scene? Where was the competition that you were measuring against?
The question again is, looking at what's going on in the state and nationally, who did you see as the competition for the state of Illinois for the governor?
Well, I'm not going to answer that question, but I will tell you one thing the governor said to me once. I said, "What's the most important thing about an election?" He said, "Choosing your opponent." So that may be the answer, Lawrence.
Okay, anybody else on that one? Yes, ma'am, right back here.
Dave Gilbert, who said, "Don't talk to the press." I did, and I almost got fired over that with Dave, but Dave actually stood up for me. And there's so many other people, Paul and other people in this room, that helped me in my career all these many years. We're all in one group now, so thank you, everyone.
Right up front here.
I want to speak to some of the small miracles that happened because of the creative problem solving of your team. I was the founding chair of the Illinois Coalition Against Domestic Violence, worked closely with my good friend Julie Hamus, and it was because of the problem solving approach to Title 20 funds in the state that the domestic violence movement and services system was born and was allowed to grow. In the state of Illinois, we were not drawing down our share of Title 20 funds. And I don't know whose idea it was, Jeff, Public Aid, or Bob, or Paul, or the combination of you all. But you decided to offer the social services community the opportunity to raise the 25% match that the state couldn't come up with to draw down those remaining funds. And it was that opportunity that gave the burgeoning domestic violence movement its opportunity to grow and receive public funds and become the strong force for good that it is today. So thank you very much.
Just real quickly, the issue was domestic violence, and she kept looking at you, Paula. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I have two comments. The first, and this is where I thought it was really an exciting thing to be in the administration. Everybody is going to have a different view of how this happened. But my sense was this was a great intersection of policy and politics. Because as you remember, Dan Walker had every social service agency in the state of Illinois furious at state government. And this was a way to say to the social service agencies as we walked in the door, we believe in what you do. We think what you do is really important. You can help make this successful. And I think that was where the Title 20 match process, I saw Tom Berkshire earlier, I think someplace here. Yes, thank you. Tom went to Washington and talked to some people and figured out ways of doing that. And on the domestic violence, I think in terms of a lot of women's issues, the governor was in the right place at the right time and did the right thing. The first Human Rights Act, domestic violence, sexual harassment order. I mean, when I look back at the things that were happening in our administration, and putting a daycare center on the roof of the Bolandic building, he said, "Are you crazy?" I mean, he was really willing to put his heart and soul and his power and influence behind a bunch of issues that did not have a lot of traction anyplace else.
Right here, sir.
Yes, sir. During the governor's, especially his last 4 or 5 years in office, there were repeated rumblings that he was making a very, very careful assessment of his chances to be the next president. All of you gentlemen and lady who had served under him had a chance to, I think, be the best judge of this. What kind of president would Governor Thompson have made if that
Damn good one.
Okay, the question is, the comment starts with, there was speculation all the way through his administration about whether or not he was interested in running for president. He and I talked about that quite a bit. Always denials from his side. But the question for the panel members is, what kind of president would he have made?
He would have made the most wonderful president you could ever imagine.
I was kind of thinking along the lines of he'd have made a damn good president.
I was thinking approximating perfection.
Were any of you considering the office you'd be working in Washington, D.C.?
Well, the governor once told me there were only 2 offices in Washington that he would even consider. The first one was the CIA, which made sense. He has very inquisitive mind along those lines, and eventually was chairman of the Intelligence Commission, and so he probably got that out of his system. And the other one was, I assume, being president, although he never said it. Regarding the first part of your assumption that during the last 4 or 5 years there was speculation, I think you might have forgotten there was a man that came along named Ronald Reagan. And he kind of changed the landscape for presidential hopefuls, but it was really during, especially that first 2-year term where he had won such an overwhelming landslide that David Broder from the Washington Post and Al Hunt from the Wall Street Journal were making trips out here, and that was their question. They said, you know, Big Jim's on the short list, and you know, we want to keep an eye on what he's doing. But I can also say that there were never any meetings, never any discussions about putting together a national strategy or whatever, and I think that goes back to the philosophy of government that we have talked about. You do the thing that you're sent there to do and don't be monkeying around with all this other stuff. But he would have made a damn fine president.
Okay, I got 2 more questions. Young lady right here. The one lesson that Governor Thompson taught each of you. Paul, I'll start with you.
Don't be afraid to do what's right.
Dr. Bob.
Let me think. Go on, Tom.
Paul is absolutely correct.
Well, that's the first time that ever happened.
I've never said it before, but I'm with Paula.
Oh my God. Let's just stop now. Don't let Bob say anything.
Okay, for the first time in 41 years, I agree with Paula.
And one more question back here.
Definitely not a Republican at the time, but Jim Thompson said, if we really want to improve our economy, we have to find a way to help women and minorities develop their businesses. This is at the time that small business development centers and all of the economic development organizations were all people, white male, and there was no emphasis on business development for women and minorities nationwide. every other state. It all started with Jim Thompson.
Yeah, Let me- one of the things that happened in Governor Thompson's first term was in selection of his cabinet, and I thought this was so instructive when he did this. He selected to be the head of the Department of Commerce and Community Affairs, the business section or center for his government, a gentleman, an African American by the name of Don Duster, whom some of you maybe remember, who was an executive at Commonwealth Edison. And it just struck me, once again, what can you say? I mean, he was selecting exactly the right talented person for the right kind of a job. And I share your admiration for his focus.
Well, we need to figure out some way to finish this off. I'm not surprised as we went through this that there was just as many testimonials about what Governor Thompson and his administration meant to people. And that certainly is reinforced by the 60-some hours I had a chance to sit down with him and talk to him and learn so much about him myself. So it was a thrill. I appreciate all the questions, all the comments, and the reflections on his life. Now, Governor Thompson, would you want to say any words to the audience here? Okay, let me get you, Mike. We got to turn that on first. Governor, you're on.
First, thank you to the Chicago History Museum for hosting this affair tonight. History has always been one of the first loves of my life, still is. And this museum, both in its prior incarnation and now, is doing an extraordinary job. And Gary, thank you very much for hosting us tonight. I'd like to begin by saying thank you to our panel moderator. 62 hours of questioning later, I'm still alive. Don't talk much anymore. But thanks very much. It was an extraordinary thing being able to do this with you, and I often go to the website and find out what other people have said about me. The panel that's here tonight is a reflection, and a good one, of the people who served with me for 14 years. You cannot be a successful governor unless you pick the very best people to help you be a successful governor. And I was blessed, literally and figuratively, by the people who served with me. The 4 people on the panel tonight were especially talented, good people. We were very close. I couldn't have succeeded without them. And the same thing could be said for the many members of the audience who served with me as well. If I was known for one thing during my time as governor, it was the ability to pick good people, to give them their head, and to admire the work they did on behalf of the people of Illinois. And I couldn't have succeeded for a day without them. I miss them. I get to see them from time to time. Nice to see Dr. Mandeville is still alive. Haven't seen him for a long, long time. Yes, I understand that. That's a lot for both of us, yes. I really appreciate what my family has done for me. I may be a good campaigner, but this woman next to me is a great campaigner. Went door to door, parade to parade, never faltered, made speeches for me. She's a better speaker than I am, incidentally. And then we produced a young lady by the name of Samantha, who turned out to be an extraordinary campaigner. Jim Skilbeck would lead the parade with his bullhorn, but Samantha, with a roll of paper stickers around her arm at the age of 5 or 6, would go down the street and didn't ask you whether you wanted a Thompson for Governor sticker. She just put it on you, and they didn't have the heart to take it off. And she was marvelous. And her interview on the website is one of my joys, to listen to my daughter talk about her father and talk about our times together. She wanted me to run for a 5th term. I said, honey, there's a time to go, and we're going. That's it. But she was an extraordinary part of that political and governmental life. We once found her downstairs at an event in the coat room, checking people's coats, gladly accepting tips. She was introduced to antiques at an early stage by her father and learned how to wheel and deal with the best of them, to the point where when she was not more than 5 years old, my secretary took her on a visit to a Springfield department store, and she picked up something, a pair of mittens or something else, and marched up to the clerk and said, "What's the best deal on this pair of mittens?" She didn't understand that every commercial transaction was not a deal. Tonight has been very special for me. Lots of great, great memories. Don't agree with all the stories they told. Some of them were wrong. I know what really happened. Fletcher, you didn't tell them about the last night of the first legislative session. Fletcher said, now look, here's what's going to happen. This is the last night of the session. This is where the deals get done. Everybody is going to be besieging us for their deal. And they're going to say their vote depends on it. And you got to do this for us. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the family living room of the governor's mansion. We're going to get a bottle of Jack Daniels, ice in 2 glasses, and we're going to have a fine evening. There will be no incoming calls from anybody, only outgoing calls from us. Well, that's what we did. It worked. We didn't have to agree to any deals for votes, and we made it. The legislature ended in kind of an uproar because some of the Democratic legislators weren't happy that Speaker Madigan was agreeing with us on education.
Right.
And so he had to seek another place to spend the rest of the evening. guarded by his legislative protector, Taylor Pouncey.
And Pouncer Taylor.
Pouncer Taylor.
Right.
Or yeah, Pouncer
Both
Taylor.
of them.
Who weighed about 350 pounds, and he was tough, and nobody got to the speaker through him. We had our doors locked. We had the phone shut off. We were having a great time, Fletcher and I. And when we finally heard that the session was done, Mrs. Thompson spoke up and said, "We can't send all these legislators home with nothing to eat." And somebody else added, "or drink." And so we invited all the legislature to the mansion, all of our staff to the mansion for a midnight dinner. I think it went on until 2 or 3 in the morning. Jane and the kitchen staff cooked eggs. At one point, she ran out of eggs, and she went out to the store and bought more eggs and came back and cooked more eggs. And it was a night that I think anybody who was there has never forgotten. Those were great times. You were all great people. You made it happen. You ought to be congratulated and thanked on behalf of the people of Illinois. You have my congratulations and thanks, and you've always had that. You will always have that. So thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for sharing this with us. Maybe, can we put on the pictures again? It's been great. Thank you very much, Mark.
Actually, we're blind drink.
Mark, can we make an announcement about gathering over at the hotel?
Yeah, Dave, Dave has a quick announcement for us here.
As happens at most Thompson gatherings, we will be adjourning to the bar over at the Hotel Lincoln, which is just right across the street, because some of these stories I know need to be sorted out. But we hope we can see everybody who wants to join us over there. Thanks. Hello, my friend.
Thompson and I are sitting there.
Stories?
I remember
And
you.
Sale would call in.
I'm doing
and say,
good. How are you
"So-and-so
doing?"
wants to change it. And we'd go, tell them a deal's a deal.
Oh, fantastic.
And it
Good
Well,
for
it's
you.
good to see you. How's your family? Everybody good?
Yeah, I've got my family wearing all my buttons tonight.
Our 9 kids, 8 are still living, 1 died young.
Yeah, doing
It's,
real good. Thanks.
25
It was just this
grandkids,
remarkable
one died
town
while
with Sal
they
and
were
kids,
very
and
young.
clustered around him.
My wife and I love the
Not
city.
quite as good, but trying to be there. And it all worked.
good.
It was just so wonderful.
We should get together.
It really, thank you for
Give me a
letting
call.
me be here. I really enjoyed it.
We'll have lunch.
I think it went very